Respected Director Management, Dr. Vidya Sekri, Summit Convener, Dr. Anusha Agarwal, distinguished speakers from the industry, delegates, senior professors, faculty colleagues, and my dear students. My name is Shikha Arora, and on behalf of ITS and on my own behalf, I extend a very warm and hearty welcome to all of you to the second round of panel discussion on the theme Direction and Pace of Reforms for Post-Pandemic Period as part of this Virtual Business Summit 2021. We had a very stimulating and thought provoking inaugural session, followed by a panel discussion on new frontiers of environment, sustainability, and governance. This panel discussion would be a step forward, focusing on the reforms for post pandemic era. And for this very relevant theme, we had our experts on board, Mr. Peter Dorrington, who's founder from Exemplify Consulting Limited, UK, Mr. Ankush Kari, Director, CRISIL, Mumbai, Mr. Atul Shukla, Vice President, JP Morgan Chase from Bangalore, Mr. P. Kanan, Senior Regional Manager, Bajaj Finserv, Mr. Maniknandan Ramesh, Head Sales Automation and Business Excellence at Haldiram Foods International Limited, and Ms. Neha Shukla, Associate Vice President with NatWest Bank. I extend a very warm and hearty welcome to all our esteemed panelists who have spared their time from their hectic schedules and joined us on this forum today. To begin with, I would like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Peter Dorrington, who has joined us from UK. Before I invite Sir, I would like to take 2 minutes to introduce him to all of you. Mr. Peter Dorrington is an expert in predictive behavioral analytics using a combination of data and behavioral sciences to lead transformation in the field of experience management, encompassing and combining customer experience, employee experience, and partner experience. By using innovative analytical techniques, he has been able to better predict customer and employee behavior and to quantify the impact on the bottom line. He is skilled in providing practical insights into the strategies, the technologies, and the methods that will significantly improve business performance. It is indeed a privilege, sir, to have you amongst us on this virtual platform. I request you to kindly address the audience. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. The privilege and the honour is all mine, I assure you. So I'll just add one little bit to that introduction, which was very kind of you to do for me. But the thing that I'm really interested in is where people and technology meet and how that is shaping the future. So my personal approach is always to look to the future and see what could be possible rather than focus on what we have done in the past. Of course, what that means is we learn from the past, but I'm always sitting there as a systems thinker trying to figure out how to do things better. Now, when it comes down to human behavior, it's complicated and difficult, particularly when you're trying to teach a computer how to do that and deal with automation. But that has meant that I've come across some very interesting applications. But what I'd first like to do is just share with you my point of view before the discussion. So I think all of us would accept that coronavirus changed everything. The speed and the scale of the change was completely unprecedented, as was the fact that it was a global pandemic by definition. And it affected all elements of a value chain. So all the actors in a value chain, whether they be suppliers, our employees, our customers, were impacted. Now, not all sectors or people were affected the same. Nonetheless, there have been dramatic changes over the last year, and we're not through it all yet. We are still in a process of transition. So there is no new normal yet. I call it the new strange. We're working out what this is going to mean. So whether it's the new coronavirus customer or employees working in a hybrid environment and the role of the office is changing, but also the role of businesses and governments and large institutions. So that was one thing I wanted to share with you. I have seen the effects of the catalyst of COVID. It has forced change. Obviously, not all that change was good. The other thing I'd like to share with you is that I saw that change, as I mentioned, impacted so many different actors that it really highlighted the fact that we're all connected. So customers were not getting supplies because businesses were not able to get raw materials. Or we couldn't shop on Main Street, so we switched to digital. So we've gone through the digital transformation, and that has raised its own concerns. There's an expression that Warren Buffett used, which I really like, which is you don't find out who's swimming naked until the tide has gone out. Well, with COVID, the tide went all the way out, and we found all of the weaknesses within businesses and in regulation and in transformation programs, particularly as we were under pressure to do those. And I'm seeing some of that coming back now as we create a new future. It's changing the way that we think, the way that we act, the way that we interact, whether you are a customer, a regulator, a supplier, whether you're part of a community, whether that is a local community or an international community, and perhaps more importantly, the international community is changing as well. So catalytic change that has affected all of the actors in the value chain. Now, my focus predominantly is on customer behavior, and I would like to share with you, there's a very simple philosophy that I have, which is customers don't care where that value chain breaks down. All they care about is how it affects them. So they will blame your organization for any failure at any point in that value chain. If they can't get food staples in the store, it's you that they blame as the store holder, not the manufacturer, not raw materials. So we have to think about an ecosystem of our value chain and the ecosystem of our wider economy as we formulate regulation, as we look at how we go through transformation. And particularly for me, say that focuses on the individual within large scale automation. So that's the context technologically and procedurally, but of course the people can't be forgotten as well. And at the moment, many of us are still feeling uncertain or worried, angry or sad as a result of what's going on, and that has impacted confidence. Now, within low confidence environments, there are already changes that we can see. So people are not spending as much as they were, they're saving some to hedge against the future. They're thinking more carefully about the actions that they take, whether it's a purchase or a major investment. There's a backlash against excess consumerism. It's no longer acceptable to go around and show how affluent you are. People are beginning to say, actually, that doesn't gel with me. That's not my experience. You know, I'm feeling the pressure. And we need a reason now to make those decisions which we could have otherwise deferred. So we've gone from what I call casual shopping to causal shopping. Give me a reason to leave the house, give me a reason to buy. But there's a huge focus on the experience now. We expect businesses to deliver. That's just the benchmark. We expect regulation to be fit for purpose and to actually serve us and not the other way around. But what we also expect is to be treated like human beings. So we expect compassion. We expect to see businesses using their resources to deliver a personal experience, and it does impact the bottom line. And I've got lots of evidence, including research evidence, that that's the case, that when we can deliver a service with compassion, when we tailor our operations around the customer or the end consumer, it does have a dramatic and measurable impact. And then there's going to be some systemic changes which I don't think are going to revert back to the old normal anytime soon, such as hybrid working. We have to figure out how can we all work together without being in tightly enclosed spaces. So the only thing I would say before we get into the conversation with the other panelists about regulation is I'm always very cautious when politics meet regulation. We see it all the time here in the UK. We've had Brexit, so the separation from the European Union. That's turned into some very ugly policies on the ground, which are clearly political. They're not economic. They're not about protecting individuals or servicing populations. And we see that around the world. We see trade embargoes, or we see trade relationships which are being developed on the basis of politics. And that's always a dangerous place to be. So I call upon people to keep a cool head and let's think about how does this serve us, not how do we serve the regulation. And with that, I'd like to hand back.
Uh, Thank you, Mr. Peter, for a very, brief and crisp talk. And it was very insightful. Of course, as you rightly said, that, one thing this crisis has done is it has revealed vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities have been highlighted. And of course, technology plays a role, but the significance of human element cannot be undermined. Very well said. If there are any questions from the participants, we would love to have any questions from the participants. You can type it in the chat box, or you can, unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, I think we shall be getting the questions once all other speakers have also addressed the audience. So I would now request Director Ma'am Dr. Vidya Sekhri to kindly say something, and we'll present a plaque to Mr. Peter Dorrington.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are perfectly audible.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Peter, for joining us on this wonderful morning here. I was listening to you and truly said by you that we are actually experiencing what has been theoretically said. And we recall that 2008 crisis because I always tell the students that 2008 was a year where we experienced this financial crisis. Today we are experiencing this VUCA world in practice. So no doubt the world has responded quickly, immediately. Technology is going to take a driving seat rather, and going to play a very important role. So thank you for your valuable presence, accepting our invitation and being with us today. Accept this plaque of honor. This is what we can do virtually. And thanks again for really your wonderful presence and your thoughts. I'm sure that students are going to have takeaways out of this. Thank you, Mr. Peter, once again.
Ma'am, can I ask one query?
Yes, please, Ayushi.
So, a very good afternoon, sir. Sir, my query is as per the definition by Stephen Hawking, the definition of adaptability, that is the intelligence to adapt to a new situation or a new change. So, sir, do you think that while adapting to a new circumstance, the loyalty also needs to be changed?
Oh, so adaptability, it is certainly something that has been much on my mind. There's a word that's been used a lot over the last year, which is pivot. Now, when you pivot, what you do is you keep your vision and your end goal in sight, but you change your strategies and tactics. And we can see that in the most extreme cases in what's happened in the hospitality industries and the retail industries. They've had to pivot very quickly. Those that couldn't adapt have really just collapsed. And for example, in the UK, the Arcadia Group, which was made up of predominantly fashion retailers on the high street, when the high street basically became a no-go zone, Arcadia Group started to suffer and actually collapse. And it's been bought up by digital businesses such as ASOS, who have bought the brand and a lot of the goodwill that's associated with it, but they don't want the stores. So some of those Arcadia Group stores, such as Topman, will not exist on the high street, except perhaps for flagship stores. So pivoting absolutely is the case, but a requirement, but it does actually have its own requirements. In order to pivot or adapt effectively, you have to know what's going on. And some of the things that we saw over the last year where we failed as businesses was to identify early enough changes, significant changes that were taking place. We didn't identify them early. And then when we did identify them, we were way too slow in taking action. Now, those that did realize early, or they were in a good position, they ramped up very quickly, and they're actually going to take market share from those that didn't. So it's going to be upon us as we play our role in industry and government to actually look at new sources of data and how those can help us gain actionable insights in a time frame that enables us to pivot effectively. Now, just because you can doesn't mean that it goes well automatically. And a lot of the businesses that have tried to become digital, so they're trying to go to clicks from bricks, have not done it well. You know, they have not rethought how the process, the customer journey or the employee journey works in a new environment. They've simply tried to digitalize what may have been a very indifferent process, and it now is a very bad process, but it's digitally enabled. So although it may be relatively easy and quick, it's not effective, it's not efficient, and it doesn't serve customer needs. And this is, I think, again, a point I would always counsel to be aware of. Don't assume that you know what customers and citizens want. Do the research, find out, but don't spend 8 months doing that. Find ways to quickly understand what is going on, what do people genuinely care about, and why do they care about it, and what it is that we can do as, say, as businesses, governments, or NGOs to support that. And that's why I said, you know, I've seen this growing swell of people say, what I care about are the fundamentals for my family. Those will never go away. We need shelter, we need food, I want to get an income. I'm much more discriminating now, though, about when I make that discretionary purchase. So don't just keep saying the same things to me through a different channel. Reflect the fact that my mindset has changed. So adaptability, absolutely. You do not have to be the world's biggest organization to do that, particularly when you can leverage things like cloud-based technology, which do give you opportunities to scale quickly, but it's not the tool that differentiates you in that environment, it's how you use that tool, which is where you get your differentiation from. So sorry, long rambling answer, but I hope that that touched to your point. So adaptability, absolutely, but you can't do it without that vision and those actionable insights, which is not the same as presenting lots and lots of data, which you also then need to give leaders choices. So the options, you know, and ideally, and I would think that this is also something that the school is also addressing, you have to be in a position where you can make recommendations. So it's great to offer people insights and data, but many executives say, what I really want is tell me what are your recommendations? What are my choices? What would you recommend? I'm still going to make the decision, but I need to be as well informed as I possibly can be.
Thank you, Mr. Peter. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and views. And once again, on behalf of ITS and on my personal behalf, I extend a very heartfelt gratitude to you for joining us on this forum today. Thank you so much, sir. With this, we move on to our next expert on board, Mr. Ankush Kari, who has joined us from Mumbai. He's Director CRISIL. Ankush is a dynamic professional with over 17 years of experience in delivery of data and technology solutions, analytics, gaining operational efficiencies in financial services, corporate planning, and strategy. He has an unparalleled set of competencies in conceptualizing strategies and projects aimed at business growth and process improvement, and has a good blend of technical, relationship, functional, and project management skills. He has in-depth knowledge and understanding of varied financial products and capital markets. His area of expertise are leadership, data management, corporate strategy and planning, business plan development, and growth strategies, and many more. It is a pleasure to have you with us today. I would request Mr. Ankush Kari to kindly address the participants. Over to you, Mr. Ankush.
Thank you, Professor Shikha. Am I audible clearly?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today and talk to each one of you. So once again, thank you for having me here. My address is going to be more on a much broader scale, where I think let me start positively by saying, yes, now there is a light at the end of the tunnel. The COVID-19 vaccination is out, and there is a lot of hope, at least, that has come in the economy. What we see in the Indian economy is there has been a massive hit, and officials estimate a sharp contraction in the economy. However, the positive is expected to return in 2021 with the positive budget behind our back. I think there is a lot of things that we need to look forward to. But make no mistake, there is going to be a long-lasting impact in all facets of life, may it be social, political, or economical. India has a very unique opportunity now to pause and reflect on the current growth trajectory that we are into. Yes, it is important to talk and discuss about 2021, but can the discussion be a little long term in nature? Can we speak about what we want to achieve in 2030 or maybe 2015? And then what is important is to work backwards in terms of what we need to do, and more importantly, what we should not do. Before we get into this discussion, I think let's look what last year has done for us. There is going to be if you reflect at the GDP growth last year in the quarter of April to December, we saw a massive decline in the GDP of 23.9% in that quarter. This was followed by a recovery of some sort where the GDP increased by 21.9%. Yes, in many terms, this is called as a V-shaped recovery, as we all know. But does that these two numbers give the right picture? Is that all rosy at the end of the next quarter? To me, the answer is clear no. Let me throw some more stats and some important ones what this has done, what this pandemic has done to us. This catastrophe has cost the global economy $10 trillion. And if the recent study by Harvard University economists is to read and go through, the economy in US, the cost of the catastrophe in US alone is estimated to be 16 trillion if the US economy comes back to near normal somewhere around the fall of 2021. An event that creates dozens of new billionaires but puts hundreds of millions or to join the poor rank is something that all of us have experienced. Let me talk about India. India saw 7 Indians add $64 billion to their wealth in the pandemic. And all of us, I'm sure, are tracking what the Indian government is doing in terms of the stimulus package that was announced in November. Economists here noted that there was 40 billion for 1.3 billion population that was announced, and rest of it were loans. You can see the comparative that I'm trying to tell you. Another recent study which I went through was by the Oxford economist, which says that emerging markets will have twice the more damage as the developed markets. And clearly there are no two ways that India is going to struggle in the long term. Policymakers, if you see, have been talking about or discussing and debating on issues like what should be the size of the fiscal deficit, the inflation, the lower unemployment, and the weak investment growth. These have been the topics which have been with us from the last many years, but thankfully there has been no pandemic. There are going to be 3 challenges that I'm going to highlight here in terms of what we should focus on in the long term, and where a transformational thinking or action is required. First, labor-intensive manufacturing. If you see, the 4th industrial revolution is slipping away. Other countries have taken lead in things like artificial intelligence, clouds, robotic, and 3D printing. I think these are clearly some notable things where a lot of countries are doing much better than what India is doing. US, China, Europe have all taken lead in the electric vehicle markets. All of us heard the news that Tesla is coming to India. I'm sure there is a reason for all of us to get excited, but I'm sure this is going to create a huge disruption in the automobile market. The second point I'm going to highlight is on the climate change. I'm not a subject matter expert here, but something that I keenly follow. It is a threat. There is no two ways about it. Pollution, drought, extreme heat, all of this are real. In 2018, we recollected the 6th warmest year in the history of India. Clearly, are we thinking of creating this threat into opportunity? Something that I would definitely want to follow and know. Last but not the least, the human capital challenge. And this is built on back of a good health and education industry. I'm sure you must have seen in 2018 when our Honorable Prime Minister, in the presence of Ivanka Trump, launched Mitro. It was a robot which made us feel very proud. Are we going in that path? Yes, we are. Is the pace enough? I think there is much more that we can do there. Meanwhile, China and other countries are taking lead in ships, high-speed trains, machine tools, computers, cell phones, and all of this didn't happen big overnight. I think they didn't get there without improved health and education system. Yes, we recently saw some transformation and new norms in the education industry, but I think they were in the right direction. There is much more that we can do. These are just three themes that I thought will require some attention and require some transformational thinking and action. I'll conclude that by these remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ankush. And I think truly said, we can surely see light at the end of the tunnel, but yes, the way ahead is not going to be very easy. It is really a tough road ahead that all of us can see with the challenges of labor intensive manufacturing, climate change, of course, and the human capital challenge. I think very well, you have focused on these challenges. I'm sure that the participants would have a lot of questions, but we would take up all the questions after all the panelists have given their viewpoints. So I would now invite thank you, Mr. Ankush, for sharing your views. We shall be taking up questions towards the end. I would now invite our next expert on board, Mr. Atul Shukla. I would introduce Mr. Atul Shukla. Mr. Atul Shukla is Vice President at JP Morgan Chase and is a seasoned analytics and consulting leader in the banking and financial services industry. He has an experience of leading large teams based across locations, delivering across risk and marketing analytics space for retail and wholesale banking products, building marketing and risk strategies around customer acquisition, lifecycle management, and customer retention. His work area spans across model development, IFRS, applications, scorecard development, retention initiatives, information business analytics, and data management. He is an MBA in finance from IIT Roorkee. He has strong leadership experience with esteemed organizations like SBI Cards, Royal Bank of Scotland, Barclays, Citibank, and Infosys in a cross-functional and global setting. In his last stint, Atul was the Indian head for risk strategy with SBI Card. In his current role with JP Morgan Chase, he is leading the auto finance originations group for India. We are extremely delighted to have you with us today, Mr. Atul. Without any delay, I would request you to please address the participants. Over to you, Mr. Atul.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Professor Shira. Can you all hear me well?
Yes, absolutely.
Sure. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. So as Professor Shikha said, I'm not an economist, primarily a banker, which kind of my job is primarily to devise strategies, which kind of takes some bit of economics into consideration, and my thoughts will probably be very similar to Mr. Ankush, who just talked about, but unfortunately that's one economy, one pandemic. Kind of thoughts might have been very similar. So before talking about the economy, if I talk about my job, my role, so me and my teams, they look at past and they kind of try and forecast and predict the future, and then that's how we devise our strategy. Looking at pandemic, I mean, this has probably never been before kind of situation. Maybe if I try and find a similarity, exactly 100 years back, Spanish flu, that was kind of similar, which kind of created similar economic reforms, not even the global financial crisis. So this is never before. But in our work, we try and get more and more economic viewpoint and focus, and that's where I'll kind of try and share my thoughts on Indian economy, my thoughts on where we were some time back before pandemic, where we are, and what might be the future. In try and keep it summarized. I'll try and not repeat things that had been talked about by my co-panelists. So Indian economy, yeah, we all say, as actually said by my co-panelists, that we all talk about the V-shaped recovery. It's really doing very well. Economy has improved. It has outperformed many countries in that recovery. And still, yeah, if you look at some activity indicators, they have improved noticeably from the post-pandemic lows, like total e-way bills, GST collections, toll collections, cargo volume at ports. They all have increased, but still the underlying doesn't change. If you look at pre-pandemic time, the GDP growth was still falling. Indian GDP growth was slowing well ahead of COVID-19 pandemic. If we talk about the year-on-year quarterly GDP growth, it was close to 4% before the pandemic. And while there have been changes in the way the GDP growth rates have been calculated, but if we see the variance in GDP growth and the gap in financial year 20 for components that contribute to the GDP in actual billion rupees terms, there have been decline in all components except for government expenditure. So whatever GDP growth we were getting pre-pandemic was largely attributed to the elevated government expenditure. Other thing, the consumer confidence index, if we talk about that, it has been declining since pandemic, we all know, but it was still very weak, starting some Q2 19 onwards. And reason for that, quickly at for declining consumer confidence index. One, Indian households, while they still carry large positive net financial assets, but this percentage has been quite flat for last many quarters. And Indian household GDP debt to GDP ratio is still well below our peers. Second, the rural wage growth. The rural wage growth has been quite low, and this has been probably even lower than the global financial, just after the global financial crisis, right? So whatever rural wage growth was there, then it is still lower than that. And third, most important, so sometime back there was a survey done for top 25,000 corporates across India, and which shows a very important fact that the employee wage growth in financial year 18 and 19, that's been lowest in last 25 years, except for the crisis years that has come in between. So the transfer of, the transfer from corporate to consumer, that's not been that as smooth and as great. And if we talk about the corporate performance during that time, revenue growth for Indian corporates that has improved from the lows recently. The EBITDA growth has been slower than the pre-global financial years, and the profit after tax growth has been volatile, but still not as low as between financial 16 and 19. But the Indian corporates, they've been through several structural reforms in very rapid succession. We talk about IBC, we talk about GST, we talk about RERA, and very recently, the liquidity tightening because of the NBFC crisis. So the corporate India has weathered several structure changes in a very short span of time, and each of these changes, no denying, arguably very good or desirable in the medium to long term, and that will enhance productivity. But it is likely, however, that a portion of pre-COVID-19 weakness was the cost that the economy had to pay for these reforms in the near term. So that has resulted in short term that the Indian corporates, Indian business, they've become more risk averse. And this risk aversion, while ensuring profitability, is not letting the corporates deleverage. And that's why they're trying to save cost, they're trying to pay less. Earlier it was pay more, hire more. Now they've moved away from that. They're not paying that much. And that's why the trend of, for Indian corporates, the wages being lowest in growth for wages being lowest in the last 25 years. Now the next question is, it's going to change after COVID goes away, after this vaccination happens for a large portion? Well, the answer seems to be no. Many companies in India, they've used, or I should say utilized this pandemic to, of course, increase efficiency, move more to the digital way of doing business, but of course with decreased spends, decreased capital expenditure, reducing employee cost, and which all seem to continue for near foreseeable future. So now the question is, if the corporate is not going to do it, can Indian government do anything? Again, possibly not directly though. So if you look at the proportion of government expenditure in the GDP, it's close to 2.2%. And India's relatively high government debt to GDP ratios, and that's still, we believe that's likely to increase quite significantly in the COVID-19 period. And normally a relatively large portion of government revenues, they're paid as interest, and countries with larger debt, they have much lower interest rates. One more thing that the government is trying to do for some time is to work towards sale or privatization of PSUs. But if you look at the estimates of potential revenues that can come from sale or privatization of these listed PSUs, it can contribute about 2% of GDP that can be raised if we talk about partial privatization. Talking about states after central government, Indian states, they've managed to keep deficit in check, but that's largely come from cutbacks on expenditure. Government data has shown that approximately 42% of the discretionary spends for all the states in India, they are towards the social causes like education, agriculture, and rural. And the capital expenditure is less than 30%. And if you look at financial year 2020 actual performance, actual revenue performance for all the different states of the country, most failed to meet revenue targets, but were able to contain deficits through large spending cuts. Now, these expenditures were reduced across the board, not across the just discretionary capex spend across all the categories that I talked about. So now, summarizing both of these things, we understand that recovery and growth is not coming through existing fiscal policies. That's the belief that I have. Then, what can be done? If we look at past, and we take example from many other countries, the GDP growth and the investment cycle, they almost always coincide. And there are three pillars in any economy that can drive investment and drive investment through capex increase: government, corporates, and consumers. Last few minutes we discussed about government, despite all the efforts, despite elevated government expenditure, can directly impact approximately 2 to 3% of the GDP. Corporates become much more risk averse because of the structural reforms, the combined effect of COVID-19. In the near future, they're not going to boost large investment through capex. So the only pillar, as my opinion, which can help drive investment and boost economy is the consumers. And to be more precise here, a real estate cycle is conceptually the best hope for capex acceleration. There's been strong correlation proven between trends in Indian GDP growth and total capital formation. A real estate capex cycle preceded corporate capex in the late 1990s to early 20s. So in the post-COVID-19 world, conditions for an improvement in real estate activity are likely to become more favorable. Because if you see Indian mortgage rates, they've fallen meaningfully during the pandemic across all the major banks in India. And if we talk about affordability, the EMI to monthly income for key Indian cities, they've improved meaningfully in the current weakness. And one more important thing about India, very India specific, the per-capita build-up floor space. If we talk about that, India is really severely underbuilt. Japan is doing twice better. China is doing 4 times. US is 8 times. And if we talk about that same length, talk about house price to income ratio for key countries, India is somewhere in the middle. So why I'm emphasizing so much on housing? Housing is a key risk asset that benefits both from demand for saving and supply of money, both at the same time. And as they all say, India has virtually infinite real estate, and that can bring that boost, that can bring that investment growth. Consider a scenario: 20% decline in home prices, 200 bips reduction in mortgage rates. It can drive around 35% reduction in EMI for borrowers, and that's a significant amount. And as the sentiments across home prices stabilize, demand for mortgages should increase in India. So now in this case, this is an ideal scenario. What can government do to do this, to make sure that something like this happens? And I'm sure they know they're doing something around this, but they know that they must be knowing that the growth and recovery is not coming through the existing fiscal policies that they have increased the government expenditure. It has to come through the monetary policies. And possible advisable scenario for RBI is to work towards decreasing the interest rates. We all know that as the interest rate decrease, things like car sales, home purchases, they are always inversely proportional to interest rates. But one thing that need to be noticed here: interest rates and consumer demand, they have a significant correlation, agree, but with a noticeable lag. For example, four-wheeler sales and interest rates. If you look at that, impact of change in yields come with around 11 months lag for four-wheeler sales, and similarly 11-month lag for large commercial vehicles. So if I try and summarize that quickly, I guess I've taken time, but if I try and summarize it quickly, there's been a good recovery post-pandemic, no doubt, but that's more to get the economy to pre-pandemic levels. And economy was definitely in weak conditions even before COVID-19 struck us. The recovery isn't coming through existing policies, in my opinion. It has to come through monetary policies that will be powered by consumer investment with capex investment driven by home purchases and similar assets. Corporates will be risk averse for some time. They'll utilize the pandemic to getting better at ways of doing businesses, but at the same time, there'll be reduced costs, including employee cost. There are reforms done by governments which are desirable in longer term, but till that comes, there will be some turbulence, and we hope that that turbulence ends soon. With that, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Atul, for such an insightful talk. I think you included so many facts and figures and, supported your viewpoint. Of course, you talked about the challenges. As the earlier speakers have also said that, we are on a path of recovery, but it is not going to be very easy. Of course, you talked about the declining consumer confidence index, as well as, climate changes and other things, and the paths to recovery and growth, where you identify the three pillars: government, corporate, and consumers. And ultimately, it is the consumer investment which is going to make a remarkable change. So I think, thank you for a very, very insightful talk. I'm sure that the participants would have a lot of questions out of all these areas, as these are very, very, insightful statistics that you have quoted here. So, we will move on to the next speaker and then we'll come to the questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Atul, once again.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Professor Shikha, and thanks a lot for having me here. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. With this, we move on to our next expert on board, Mr. P. Kannan, who is a Senior Regional Manager with Bajaj Finserv. Mr. Kannan is working as Senior Regional Manager at Bajaj Finserv. He is an experienced BFSI professional with a successful track record. He is a proven leader in banking, sales, service, relationship, and channel management, with enhanced understanding of digital, fintech, data technology, and business analytics. He has received various rewards like Champion Award and Hero of the Month Award for business performance. He has received many certificates of appreciation and recognition in his professional life. It is indeed an honor for us to have you with us here, Mr. I request you to please address.
Hi to all. Hello to all. I'm audible?
Over to you, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, you are audible, Mr. Kannan. Hello.
I'm on 1 minute. I would take, please. 1 minute. Am I audible properly?
Yes, Mr. Kannan.
Hello, I'm audible?
Yes, you are audible, sir.
1 minute.
Sure, sir.
Yeah. Give me a minute. Okay. See, I think, I would, first of all, I want to say hi to all. I could see almost 200 participants. I hope all are there because it's post-lunch session.
Yes,
so are they are there? Great.
Yes,
I wanted to thank the institute, also Dr. Vidya, Professor Anusha, and also Professor Rachana Malhotra. Thank you all. See, I would say that we are talking different times and different experience. Okay, and what I'm trying to say that now everybody is an expert. We have seen what we have gone through in 2020. Indeed, while our late 90s and school days, we used to read Abdul Kalam's India 2020. We all aimed different 2020, but it's a different 2020 happened. Okay. Now, what happened was something different, like a lot of desperation, a lot of learning, lot of, I would say, year of survival, and definitely a lot of doomsday, but things definitely improved. Indeed, I should tell you, unlike other participants or a panelist, I work in the ground. I get to meet a lot of corporates, a lot of policymakers, a lot of government people. And last year it was gloomy. Anybody, it was absolutely big no for everything. But now things are definitely changed in a better way. And last year, if I get into any office, any institution, any corporate, it was full mosque. Now things are changing. They're saying in Hindi, "Mere paas maa hai, abhi mere paas dawa hai." So people are looking positive. Things are improving. As Mr. Peter, Mr. Ankush, and Mr. Adul pointed out, there are so many things to talk about. But what we are trying to see is that, is it real? There are people talking about end of the tunnel. There are people talking about end of everything. And somebody mentioned about V-shaped recovery. There are people talk about V-shaped recovery. The data says, of course, recent Indian economy survey. And there are people talk about K-shaped, what we call recovery. There are people talk about the U-shaped recovery. There are people talk about hockey stick recovery. So multiple rhythms, multiple perspectives, multiple data flowing left, right, center. Like if the last 1 year, like last 12 months, if you see some data from anybody, it's World Bank or IMF or local regulator like RBI or like Asian Development Bank, everybody, anybody given some projection for world GDP, India's GDP, then revised. But however, one thing is clear, despite all the revisions, still it was shown that there's going to be growth in FY22. So where I am seeing the like positive growth, like understand the recovery so far, majorly on two parameters. Of course, somebody pointed out government expenses. Government has to spend money on people and policies and infrastructure. It's been happening, and also some growth in agri. So unless all the sectors, at least not all, most of the sectors, say about hospitality, say about aviation, say about any sector which is very, very important, unless it start moving, trust me, you can keep talking, V-shape, M-shape, whichever way you feel it, the struggle would continue to be there. Okay. Now, where is the whole scenario moving to? Kindly allow me to, I'm trying to share my PPT, only 1 minute. You have to give me control. Is it visible, my PPT? No.
No, sir, not yet.
Not only 1 minute. Give me a minute.
Sure, sir.
Give me a minute. I am trying. There's some technical glitch. I'm seeing it. One minute. Give me a minute. Okay, there could be some, okay, no issues. Okay, that's we leave with these virtual days, no problem. Okay. So, given the background that now everybody is looking up to, government has to infuse a lot of confidence. Corporates, they have to infuse a lot of confidence. Consumers, they're reactive. Okay, like they are reactive. There are some, of course, you'll see a lot of million days happening in Flipkart and Amazon. Okay, but are they sustainable? That's a big question. Okay, so what I'm trying to say that there are sectors improving, there are sectors not improving, there are sectors struggling, there are sectors still kind of moving backward and front foot. The overall situation, it's very, very important. The government has to keep on giving guidelines and things, and also real implementation. There are two policy documents which came up recently, the budget and the economic survey. Both talk about the so-called allocations, so-called situations, so-called what we call overall like macro, micro, in between situation. Hope all these things improve, hope all these things get implemented. So we would at least be through with worst. While we speak, still we are very much part of the worst. And given the background, as I mentioned that again repeatedly, there are sectors improving, multiple sectors getting into more traction mode, things will improve. One small example, say about I am from financial institution. Say like in June, July, probably we get what 2 million customer application for a loan. Now that has come to 20 million customer application. See that, it's an improvement. From 2 million customer application for a loan, now 20 million. That's an improvement. Talk about like, in hotel industry, have you ever thought about zero occupancy? Yes, in April, May, June, it was zero occupancy. Now you talk to anybody from hotel industry, they're talking about not worst, at least 30, 40, 50. Things are improving. Like education, education. Now at least there are schools I know, they started opening. There are institutions are being allowed to collect fees, all those stuff. So sector-wise, things are opening. Given the background, there are sectors already opened up. Given the scenario, there are sectors opening now. I am expecting very, very positive outlook for coming FI and further. So there I rest my case, Sika.
Yes. Mr. Kannan, can you hear me? You are muted, sir.
He's muted, Shiv.
Ma'am, I have said that. Mr. Kannan, you are muted. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Well, I was telling that, given that situation, like given that my thought process, we are very much beyond the worst. We are very much on the way to best. So whether it's V-shape or U-shape or hockey stick or K-based recovery, things are moving up for everybody. That's what I would say, Sika. There, I rest my case. Yeah, on that note, I want to thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Kannan. Thank you so much for you sharing your observations and viewpoints. Yes, as you said, we are on the road to recovery where some sectors have already shown improvement and some sectors on the, they are improving gradually, and the government guidelines and implementation play a crucial role. Thank you so much for sharing your views once again, and we shall have the questions towards the end. With this, we move on to our next expert on board, Mr. Manikandan Ramesh, who is Head Sales Automation and Business Excellence at Haldiram Foods International Limited. Mr. Ramesh is a visionary leader and an astute professional with 17 plus years of rich experience in various domains, including strategy, business development, sales and distribution, growth management, business excellence, and team management. He is a proactive leader with an extensive, I think there's some disturbance. Thank you, sir. Mr. Ramesh is a proactive leader with an extensive experience in managing business operations with focus on enabling top line and bottom line performance, increasing revenues, and augmenting profitability. He is an effective communicator with result-oriented skills, strong analytical, problem-solving, and organizational abilities. He has contributed to the growth of high-value and reputed organizations like DS Group, Radiant Polymers, Motherson Sumi Systems, amongst others. His exemplary achievements include Best Change Management Award in Future Retail Summit Awards 20, Best Performer Award for Operations Management and Planning, Best Manager Award in MEP Program Certification, Special Guest in South Mirchi Music Awards in 2016, and various food meets, recognition in the Food Summit Awards in the presence of Honorable Minister Shri Ram Vilas Paswan in August 2016. We are very pleased to have you here with us, sir, on this platform. Without any further delay, I would request you to kindly address the participants. Over to you, Mr. Manikandan Ramesh.
Thank you, Shikha. Thank you, Vidya ma'am. Thank you, Anusha. Thank you, Ritika, and the entire ITS team. Very, very happy to be a part of such delightful and energetic forum. I am very curious, to happy to see smiling and curious faces of all the students virtually, though amidst the pandemic scenario. Wishing everyone's well-being amidst the challenging times. A lot of things have been said about pandemic, everything. I would like to just summarize in one word. In concept, these are the key variables. This too will change. Right? Among all the changes and challenges, we have been talking about a lot of changes and challenges. You can't spell challenge without a change. Right? That has to be. So that is what it is. And
I'm
has
sorry
been
to
very.
interrupt, Mr. Mani. Sir, there's a lot of noise in the background. I think there's some issue.
Am I okay now? Am I audible now? Is it okay?
Yes, it is better now, sir.
Yeah. So I was saying, first of all, like, thank you to everyone. Very happy to be a part of such a delightful forum. And I can imagine the curious and lovely faces of all the students and other thank the panelists. I would just, and a lot of things have been spoken about the change and the challenge and the pandemic. I would like to just summarize in one Sanskrit line, Etadapi parivartishate. That means this too will change, right? Mankind has been very strong. We have faced a lot of things. Now we are open for this storm. The storm has gone. Now it is time to norm and perform. So basically, you can't spell the challenge without change. If you're going to rise to the challenge, you have to be prepared for the change. We have seen the change. Now it is time to accept the challenge and move forward. So growth and coming, being very, we have spoken a lot about theoretical things and other things, very industrial things. I would like to be very, very specific in terms of the topic and in terms of the industry I am related to and how we have marched ahead. So the growth and pace of reforms post-pandemic has been really interesting one. Pandemic has really brought an interesting restructuring of the global economic order and social order. The entire leaders, the entire industries, they have summed it up into 5 major steps. I would like to just say resolve, resilience, return, reimagination, and reform. We are talking about new normal and we are moving towards the next normal. The top leaders have actually spoken about the resolve, resilience, return, reimagination, and reform. Let the important aspect, if we speak about resolve, the safeguarding our life and livelihoods, that has been the imperatives of our time. So we have been very resolute, we have been very strong to accept the change, to enable the change. Now we are seeing healthcare system, there have been extensively much hats off to the doctors and the warriors. They have been very kind, very phenomenal in accepting the resolution and resolving the things and marching ahead. So the workers, the supplies, and they have been very, very phenomenal. Business continuity and employees have been more friendly. For example, if I speak about, say, FMCG, the industry has been, all the industries have been very cautious, but FMCG has been extra cautious in terms of safety. So safety has been very phenomenal, very important aspect. So the organizations have been very determined as far as the resolve aspect is concerned. If we speak about the education institutions like ITAs, they have again seen that the students have to be called out, whether the virtual sessions have to be enacted. So the entire segment, whether it's education sector, whether it's FMCG sector, or the entire industry, we have taken the resolution part, we have taken the resolve part. So this is something which we have been currently focusing. As top leaders say, I know what to do. I just need to decide whether those who need to share and act as per my resolve to do so. So we need to be very clear in what we want to resolve. So that is aspect A. And how FMCG has again moved forward in terms of resilience. It could have been very easier for us to accept the defeat. But India has been very strong. The industries have been very strong. The people have been even more stronger. We have been very resilient to accept and move forward. For example, I am leading a team of almost 1,000 odd people, where there were a lot of workers, there were sales staff, lot of people were there, but nobody gave up. Obviously, yeah, there were times in April when a lot of labor had moved out, but we ensured their safety, we ensured that the well-being of theirs, and they also reciprocated back by giving good productivity and ensuring that they were very resilient in doing so. So resilience is something which the growth and pace of pandemic has been very fruitful. So we are talking about return. By return or reshape, most industries have reactivated the supply chain. Earlier, supply chain was like, okay, we will just go, we will just transfer the goods, we will enable the economy. Now we have been supply chain has been very robust. We have seen, had not been the dynamics and adaptability of the Indian supply chain, we wouldn't, so for such a kind of population, we wouldn't have been able to cater to the goods, right? Essential items like milk, food, every family. I don't think there were challenges, there were issues, but people were able to get their basic needs. So this showed the returns, that the reshaping of the entire industry was very good, very phenomenal. The leaders reassess their entire business system and plan for contingent actions. They saw what is best productive, what are the different ideas for enhancing their productivity, and what are the different ways. There were virtual sessions, there were technology has reimagination. Second part, fourth part, entire paradigm has shifted to technology. So we are seeing how, for example, Salesforce automation. Earlier we were doing sales. Now we are doing sales, marketing strategy through virtual things. How automation can help, as Peter was also speaking, right? How the automation can help us, enables in terms of getting the right productivity. So business dynamics have changed. A lot of things have reimagined, reshaped, reformed. So finally, like, the crisis will reveal not just vulnerability, but opportunities to improve the performance of businesses. So change will come, challenge will come, but dynamically we have to reform. As we just say, business leaders now have anticipated properly through support changes. Now online system, everything is online, food essentials and other things. So we have actually moved on to a very fruitful scenario. Yes, things have been very tough, very challenging, but the focus has been quite dynamic, quite interesting, and has moved towards a very healthy scenario where things are growing and growing in a very good aspect. So that's exactly like education have, like, distance learning has come up, FMCG, like we have given a good social welfare, corporate social responsibility activities. As far as sales marketing techniques are concerned, earlier we were doing a lot of, say, for example, onshore BTL activity. Now we are focusing more on advertisements and more on virtual media hype, so that how different business goals can be achieved. So nothing has stopped actually. In fact, there are always going, if you see the number, FMCG has actually grown up and our industry has actually grown up. It's just that the innovations and the technology, this has also helped us to think innovatively and be creative and be brilliant. The mankind has been always creative. I was reading Sapiens book 2 days back, just as a recap. I'm sure all of us will be loving that. It is all about, just not about survival, it is about adaptable and growth. So we are moving towards growth, and the next normal will be a better one. And I'm sure, as final year students or third year students will be curious, we are studying in the final year, what is going to be the next scenario. It is a bit state of concern and state of curiosity, but trust me, things are very good, and we are moving towards a future goal. We are moving towards a betterment, and this will help us in the betterment of society. And I would just sum it up. It's about faith in God, faith in ourselves. That is the greatest way to success. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ramesh. I think the address was really very positive and full of optimism. Yes, resilience is the new word that all of us have been listening to. Definitely, challenge and change is a part of the journey, of course, post-pandemic. And I think any pandemic or any crisis raises more questions than answers. So definitely we have to be on a learning path, and creativity, innovation, pandemic has really given us an opportunity to reinvent ourselves. Thank you so much for your wonderful address. And now it's time for us to move to our last expert on board. We have with us Ms. Neha Shukla, who is Associate Vice President, NatWest Bank. Ms. Neha is a gold medalist in economics and an MBA from IIT Roorkee. She is an analytics leader with more than 13 years of experience in the financial services and pharmaceutical domain. She has vast leadership experience with esteemed organizations like NatWest Bank, Citibank, etc. It is a pleasure to have here you with us today, Neha. I welcome you on board. I request you to please address the participants.
Thanks, Shikha, for that kind introduction. I'm really pleased to be a part of the session. I think hearing all the experts, it has certainly added a lot of understanding of how things will change and how things should change. What I'm going to talk about is drawing from my own experience on in working with lots of MNCs, and also I'll resonate to a lot of things that Mr. Mani just said before me. So yes, we all agree that COVID-19 not just impacted the health of the people of the country, but it also had put immense pressure on the health infrastructure. It also had some lots and lots of ripple effect across the different sectors of the economy. The economic activity was restricted, which led to unemployment, reduced spendings, but more importantly, the shift in consumer behavior. All of this now warrants not only the revival of the economy, but a paradigm shift in the way things have been happening in the past. The new normal is now going to be the harbinger of change in almost every sector. And I would specifically focus on how things will change and should change in the corporate sector so that all the MNCs and all the businesses can stay relevant and can also contribute towards the revival of the economy. One important thing to note is that pandemic hasn't brought anything new to the table that the corporates weren't thinking about before. But what it has done is it has accelerated the pace at which the corporates were planning to address their long-standing challenges, structural inefficiencies, etc. So I'm going to specifically talk about 4 areas. And I will also talk about how intertwined they are and how one will pave way for the other. So I will touch upon rebranding and restructuring of portfolio offerings, the digital adoption that is the most talked about thing today, how cost structure changes will happen, and of course, very importantly, some of the workplace reforms. So starting with rebranding, I'm sure a lot of us must have noticed how the FMCG's advertisements changed during this time. I think every company tried to emphasize how safe their products are, how they will help fight the virus, and how these products will build immunity in us. The travel and tourism sector started talking about new places, new air, fresh air, safe air, etc. And I think, in my opinion, this trend will now stay for long now. So with the focus of safety first, all organizations today want to reform and rebrand themselves as safe, caring, and resilient. In service sector too, I think a lot of companies and MNCs, they differentiated themselves by the way they treated their employees. They truly became a caring employer. They provisioned lots of COVID-related sick leaves, no loss of pay for COVID-related illness, a lot of childcare provisions, and increased flexibility when it came to work. I think all of this change, coupled with how quickly the organizations adapted to the need of customers and environment, was also very important. So I think almost all FMCGs added lots of new products to their kitty. We heard of spray sanitizers, we heard of fruit and vegetable wash liquids, etc., which always existed, but they were never advertised to such an extent. Also, not only FMCGs, if I may talk about, I think every organization, every company, they changed their product offerings. For example, banks stood up to offer greater flexibility when it came to their products. So for example, working in the bank, I can certainly say how much hard work we had put in during this time to ensure that we can offer flexibility to our customers who were financially stretched by offering them payment holidays, easier loan processing, waiving off their fees and structures, to just demonstrate how caring we are as a provider. Now today, what will happen is that companies will start focusing more on investment in value creating and sustainable assets, such as green technology, health, wellness, and of course, the digital offerings. Now, this brings me to the next change or reform that is happening very quickly, which is digitalization or digital adoption. So just like customers who migrated towards the digital channel for almost everything when it came to grocery, shopping, education, health, entertainment, and even for socializing, the companies and the merchants were also very quick to adapt to this need. The organizations, the companies, the merchants, they all digitalize their entire value chain. And I would say this is one of the biggest gift of COVID, if I may call. I know COVID never gifted anything, but digitalization is something that I would say has been accelerated. The government has been striving to digitalize the economy for quite some time now. But what this pandemic has done is it has accelerated this change to a great deal. And in a way, it has supported government in doing what they were trying to do before. Now it's turn for the government to ensure that we have the right infrastructure, we have the support and some strong regulations around the same, so that this change that has already happened becomes permanent and people do not move and go back to the previous ways of non-digital means wherever it is absolutely not necessary. So I'm by no means I'm saying that schools should still continue the remote education. I know how important it is for kids to mingle, but certainly there are areas where we shouldn't just go back to our non-digital means of doing things. Digitalization will also bring in an important thing for the companies, which is it will help them to get their cost structures right. So in the long term, in the competitive economy like ours, every organization has been trying to reduce their fixed costs. And with the dwindling revenues because of the demand shock that this pandemic gave, it has become all the more important that we can just set our cost structures right, reduce our fixed costs. And the companies have been looking to reform their operations in a way so that they can move away from their legacy systems and move to digital ones. And some of the ways that I think companies can very easily control cost in this new environment is by increasing outsourcing. So I think pandemic has proved that any job can be done from anywhere. Even the CEOs were working from home. So there is no need to believe that for a particular job, it can only be done at the onshore location. So outsourcing is going to become even bigger than what it is today. Adopting digital assist models for sales and services is something that will come along with digitalization, and this certainly brings in lots of efficiencies. I wouldn't want to highlight the importance of digitalization and automation more here. I think all the speakers have talked about it, but certainly this will, of course, reduce the operating costs for the companies. Another thing, I think it's a big line in the cost line, which is office spaces. So the office spaces are now shrinking. Companies are exiting buildings and they are saving huge on their rents. This is again something which has been a big ticket item for them. And this will certainly help them to get their cost to income ratio right. And the last one I would say is reducing the travel costs. So these are some of the easy cost savings that are coming our way. Nothing that they need to do big. They all are a result of one another. So these are the ways the companies will reduce cost. With office spaces reducing and less people coming to work, as I said earlier, the companies are actually preparing further for some very big workplace reforms. As I said earlier, companies are now trying to rebrand themselves as great place to work, and more importantly, safe place to work. So there are some of the new workplace reforms that will come into picture, something like reducing office buildings, redesigning offices so that there is more space for meetings, brainstormings, meeting your colleagues than really having your desks from where you can work. Increased remote working, less work-related travels, and a shift in hiring patterns, because now it doesn't matter where you are. And what the companies saw in this pandemic was how much pressure it puts on you if you have a permanent workforce, and laying off and salary cuts was nothing that anyone desired, but they had to do. So there will be a shift in hiring patterns, probably more of contingency workforces will increase in how the companies hire people. It will also become more inclusive, I would say. The dropout rate for women have been really high in the past, but with the increased flexibility of working from home, working flexi hours, I would say lots and lots of female workforce can still stay in business and will not have to drop out. And lastly, the most important one is focus on output over hours. So I think we all agree we've worked more hard during this time, and no one ever questioned where are we working from and how long are we working till the time the work was done. So that focus on output is going to become more important. And I believe these are some of the easy reforms that will happen, certainly happen in corporate sectors. I do see them coming in my organization, and they will certainly pave way for a stronger economy. And when all the forces will come together and bring the economy to revival, the corporates will still stay strong. So with that, I will pass back to Professor Shikhar. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Neha, for a very interesting talk. Of course, as you rightly said, this pandemic has surely acted as a catalyst, and the pace of transformation was really something that was unheard of, unthought of. So I think definitely this pandemic has really acted as a catalyst. Of course, you have highlighted all the new changes that have occurred, new realities that we have realized, whether it is remote working, new hiring patterns, new compensation, performance appraisal patterns, everything is changing. And yes, the move from becoming a great place to work to a safe place to work, very well said, Neha. I think students must have also thoroughly enjoyed and learned a lot from your talk. Thank you so much, Neha, for joining us and for sharing your views. I would now, like to take up questions. Some of the questions are already there in the chat box. So there are a number of questions. Yes, our panelist, Mr. Peter Dorrington, has also posted a lot of questions and views and comments on the chat box. Shraddha has asked a question: how to sustain the accelerated pace of digital business transformation? And I think this question is addressed to Neha. This is the question.
Yeah, so I think sustainability is the question for everyone. We all are talking about reforms. Everything needs to sustain. For us, in terms of digital, making these digital reforms, I think government will have to play a very, very important role. We all know how much we struggle when it comes to internet breakages, etc. But more importantly, making digital interactions safe should be the priority for the government as well. So having stricter regulations, ease of digital interactions, the confidence that should come in. And I think pandemic has certainly proven that for an entire year, we could still have no penny in our pockets and still pay things through digital means. And everyone was very easily accepting it. So even a small tailor is accepting Paytm payments today. So I think we have proven this period was a practice period, if I may say, that you can stay digital.
Participants, please mute yourselves. Amit?
Yeah.
So it would be about stronger infrastructure, as I said, stronger regulations, and increased confidence in the consumer that things are safe. Your money is always safe. Is what will help us will help in sustaining this.
Sika, I would add a point here, like Kannan here. The same thing. See, like pre-pandemic, say about last finance, like you can say same period, we had only 40%. Say even worst case was best was 50% digital transaction. Today, within banking industry, the number of transactions, you will not believe me, it almost touched 90%. Even at rural areas, like it's almost 70%.
Right.
One end, it's good, it's going up. Think about us on the back end, building up capabilities, like certainly from 50 levels to 80 level, 90 level. So our challenge to build up the capabilities, also scaling up. That one point I want to add it while we're talking about digital engagements.
Right, sir. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Kannan. Thank you, Ms. Neha. There's another interesting point which has been in the chat box by our panelist, Mr. Peter Dorrington, where he has addressed this to Ankush ji. How well prepared do you think the developing economies are to address the demand for new skills and competencies?
A very interesting question, Mr. Peter. I think if this was to be asked, I think 5 years back to me, I would give a one-word answer. We aren't prepared. But I think now I have a very different perspective, at least to this, in terms of what we have done in the last 5 years in terms of incorporating new skills, new courses in our education system. There is also the PPP, which you mentioned. I have a different PPP, which is the public-private partnership that has also led to enhancement in this area. If you see institutes like ITS and similar institutes, I'm sure they have engaged a lot more with corporates, have inculcated many new advanced courses made both on the technical side, technology side, on data and analytics. I'm sure there are institutes are doing their part in a big way. And I believe the future holds a lot of good things for a country like India and emerging markets. Yes, I say we have done enough. As I said in my talk, I think there is a scope to do more. And there is always that, and it's always good in some way or the other that there is a scope to do more. And I believe that the thinking is there and we are moving in the right direction. There is a clear understanding that there is a requirement of such technical and technology skills needed. And I think we are doing good things there.
Yes, thank you. If I could just add a little bit to that question and why I asked it. I watched, like everybody did, the dash to digital, where so many companies went through a rapid transformation, achieving in weeks what would have normally taken months or years. Now, the first challenge they had, a bit like remote working, was firstly technical. Could we get it all to work? Could we get the technology to work? And then they started to redress the processes. So the processes had to be made fit for purpose. And eventually they got to the people. How do we include the people within this? Perhaps the wrong way around if we were doing a measured and designed challenge. But what has happened in the dash to digital is it's highlighted a dramatic need for different skill sets, because everything that you can automate is getting automated. And that's actually leaving a residue of complex, unique tasks requiring creativity and ability to look at the data, formulate new solutions. And that's real challenges for workers. And it's why some of the workers that were well prepared for existing workplaces have found the transition to new work so difficult, because they're actually having to build competencies that were not demanded of them before, or that they found they could do very well on a personal level, on a face-to-face engagement, but when they were disintermediated by the technology was much more challenging. So, I'm very confident, by the way, I'm optimistic about the future. I think we've still got challenges ahead, but lots of opportunities as well. But I'm seeing that those organizations that are doing the best are accelerating their growth now, is because they're recognizing that we not only need to use great technologies, but we also need to go through that restructuring, our retransformational reformulation of our business operating model. And then we need to be able to have the staff in place to do that. It's difficult if you've been a craftsperson working in manufacturing to suddenly have a great online presence when you're dealing with people through a digital channel. So, I think that that's something that I'm thinking a lot about what competencies and skills do we need, but we also need to consider if you have people who are dealing with nothing more than unique, difficult, challenging problems for their whole day, every working day of their week, they burn out. So we also have a responsibility as employers to provide, I think it was Nihal said, not only a great place to work, but a safe place to work, one which is enjoyable in the new world of work. So sorry, I just wanted to add a little bit more into why I asked the question.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. We have another question that has been posed by Mr. Kanan to Atulji, and he says that which are the top sectors which are important for quick recovery? This is for Atulji.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Thanks for that question, Mr. Karan. This is really important question. While there can be different opinions about different sectors, I'll probably go simply by statistics that I've been trying to do by numbers. If I look at different sectors and the percentage shares, percentage GVA shares, three that come to my mind: financial, real estate, and professional services. That contributes 24.3% for 25%. That is probably the first sector that can contribute a lot to the recovery: financial, real estate, and professional services. Second, approximately 20% share in GVA is that's tourism, trade, hotels, transport, and things related to broadcasting. Third, which is important and which there have been some things going on, is manufacturing. So these are the key three sectors, as per my understanding, which kind of will pave way for the economy, and of course not again in terms of the same share, agriculture, forestry and fishing is the next one, maybe public administration, defense and the services. But primarily these are the, because of their contribution and because of the growth that they have from 2019, 2021, I believe these three sectors probably can lead the growth for quicker recovery.
Thank you, Atul. Yeah, please. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, and on the similar thoughts, I just thought to add, and of course we can discuss further on this one. But since the start of the session, I've been kind of thinking of adding to one question that I guess Ayushi had asked to Mr. Peter at the start about adaptability. And why I was holding this thought, because this is my favorite anecdote that I give during any of my TED Talks or to any of my teams about change. Some stories, some examples. Do you all know, I'm sure many of you know, but do you know how Nokia as the company started as? What was Nokia when they started? They started as a paper and pulp company. Not many of us know. Nokia, when we talk about it, comes at a mobile phone manufacturing and telecommunication company. Right? So they started from there. They worked on paper manufacturing and other things, and then they moved to mobile phone generation, communication, and then they kept on reinventing till the time they didn't move from Symbian to Android, and then from top market leader they went to out of top 10. That's that story about adaptability. You keep on doing that, you'll keep on succeeding. When you stop doing, irrespective of the fact how big you are, irrespective of the fact where you stand, you will go out of place. Same story about YouTube. Again, do you know how YouTube started as? YouTube was a dating site, an online dating site where people used to upload their bios and say, I'm this person. They were looking for a match. That didn't work out, and then they reinvented. Now we know what YouTube is. So that's what I just thought I'll add to all the great answer that Mr. Peter talked about on adaptability. This is really key. Pandemic has given us that speed with which we can reinvent ourselves. And that's where is going to make differentiation between some organization which is going to be really highly successful and some of the organization which might not do as great. So thank you so much.
Atul, one more question. I'll take a minute here. I want to check with you how you see the insurance, this FDI to 74% from percent 49. Where you see the whole thing's going to happen?
Sorry if I understood that clearly. Insurance FDI, you're saying that the change that has from 49 to 74%, that the allowance of foreign investment in that.
Yeah. Like given the background that now things are moving up from 49 to 74, where do you see the whole things moving towards?
So I guess not even for insurance. Insurance, it has an investment. That has there was a cap, of course, of less than 50%. Now it has gone to 74, along with many other things. I guess that is going to be the case for many other sectors. At least the current government, they are every government has different thoughts. This government probably has a thought of getting more and more investment in different sectors. Insurance, not only about the general insurance, health insurance. These are the things that are going to be much more important for everybody. In India, people have gone increasingly aware of insurance. Before that, probably selling a simple LIC policy for a major proportion to of our working people difficult. Now, due to pandemic, not only about health insurance, but about term insurance and all the other things, there has been lots of awareness. With this kind of investment, more that foreign direct investment coming in these sectors, I guess few things might happen. One is more and more competition, giving benefits to the customer with better products, with better service offering, more compliance on claims, and increasing more awareness, of course, from government side and from organization side, so that people can spend as much on insurance and future as is case with the different more evolved countries as against India, where probably the coverage is pretty low. Those are my thoughts. Thank you, Mr. Karan, for the great question.
Thank you, Atul. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Atulji. I think if the panelists permit, maybe take up one more question, although it is 3:30, but there are a lot of questions popping up in chat box. So if you permit, I think we can take up one more question.
Yes, take up the question.
Yes, this is a question which has been posted by Himanshu Paliwal, and he says that how the government policy and union budget help us to recover from the challenges during the COVID pandemic. Hello.
Yeah, not sure
Am I audible?
Question is actually. You are Professor Shikha. I'm not sure which panelist this question is actually asked for, so I'll probably give my.
I think.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
sorry, please go ahead.
This is not addressed to any specific panelist. I think anybody. The question is for the entire panel. So.
So I'll probably give my 2 cents, and then probably more learned and panelists can add. I'll just probably talk about the same thing that I talked. Government policy, union budget. In union budget that looks more progressive as of now to start with. Yes, lots of investment, lots of plans about the capital expenditure, more infra creation. That will probably lead to more job creation in longer term. But my point remains same. Government for last some time and during the pandemic has been trying to increase the government spending more on fiscal policies. That is one thing that probably they need to move away from. That is not going to impact on a very larger term. As I said, 2.2% of GDP is government expenditure. Even if they increase that, it's not going to have larger impacts. Some of the policies that I talked about has been really big, GST or RERA and all, which are going to bring more regulation, but on a longer term. So while union budget is good, and probably many of us will have this thought in mind, most of my co-panelists, that it's not as good for me, probably, but it might be good for nation. That's what I've heard from everybody. Things like VPF, interest on, the tax on interest on VPF and all those things, probably many of us will think not good for the average taxpayer, no change in the tax brackets for us. All those things probably, we can consider not as good, but the budget probably is, going good for longer term. Government still needs to work on interest rates, needs to increase spending, which might then infuse lots of investment and help sustain, making economy grow in a more longer sustainable term.
One quick point, Sika, can you allow me to do that? See, when you talk about budget, if you see last 10 years, like even you take as much time, it's more a policy statement. Okay, this year, various reasons, they have not touched anything, though there are a lot of announcement. And as Atul rightly said, what is there for me? That question to be explored in a different perspective. But this year, government tried to manage things in a more positive way. They have announced certain schemes for various sectors, but we have to wait and watch how much being implemented that way, Sika. That's quick.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Cannon. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this. Before I move forward, Anusha ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay.
I would just sum up, Shikha,
yes,
for
yes.
Kaushiki's question. Like, see, it is about progressive and learning and digitization, as all the panelists said. See, because it is now the hiring and the entire learning and unlearning is completely on analysis and analytics from top to bottom, right? We are seeing WFH, we are talking about safety, we have to pay everything. So a lot of things have moved on. We are talking about Make in India, we are talking about digitization. So it's, to sum it up, as Kannan also said, mere paas maa bhi hai, mere paas mass bhi hai, mere paas mastery bhi hai. And that is how we will get money as well as money. MANI, not MANI, but MONEY and prosperity.